Are you thinking of buying a flat? Well, in this video we're going to look at some of those key considerations you need to think about when buying that residential flat, whether you're a first-time buyer or buying it for buy-to-let purposes. My name's Mike Carpenter and I'm a chartered surveyor. I've been surveying property for over 30 years. So as you can imagine, I've seen a lot of the problems and challenges you're going to face as a home buyer. In this video, we're going to look at some of those problems and challenges you might face when buying a residential flat. So please subscribe to this channel and also download the free information below. So let's get cracking. Residential flats usually come in a block. That means you've got very close neighbours and that you actually don't own the ground the flat sits on. That means the property is usually held leasehold, where you will own the property for a fixed term of years. And that can be anything from 99 to 999 years on a leasehold basis. That adds a number of complications to the purchase process because you're not buying the ground the property sits on, but you're actually having a lease. That lease needs to be carefully considered by your solicitor. And therefore there are other considerations such as who owns the land and what is the situation or the relationship between you, the leaseholder, and the actual person, the freeholder. Well, you have to pay them a ground rent for a start for the privilege of leasing that piece of ground. That's normally quite nominal, can be anything from a peppercorn of £10 up to say £200 per year. But you need to check the lease and go through that with your solicitor. Another thing with a leasehold property which is different from a freehold property is you have to pay a service charge. As you can imagine, you're situated in a block with other people and therefore there are communal areas, there's maintenance liabilities in respect to the main structure which have to be managed in a certain way. And that's usually by a management company who charge a maintenance charge on each of the leaseholders in the block to maintain the property as a whole. So you need to look at that and look at that charge carefully, because these costs can vary quite significantly from flat to flat, and if they are particularly high for one reason or another, they can put people off the purchase of the property when you come to resell. Another thing to consider is there may be restrictions on what you can and can't do within that flat. Some restrict pets, for example. Others don't allow Airbnb, a very popular mechanism in this day and age. Others prevent you from making loud noises or other disturbances because obviously you've got very close neighbours. So again, you need your solicitor to check that lease very carefully to see whether those restrictions are going to prevent you doing something you want to do with that property. So, when you're looking round a property, what should you be looking for when looking at a flat? Well, the first thing to do is to look at the block as a whole. Look at how it's being maintained. If the communal areas look shabby or undecorated or poorly maintained, then that's a clear indication that the property itself is probably not being very well managed. And therefore that gives you an overall poor impression, so when you come to resell, that may be an issue. So check out the management company, have a word with one of the neighbours in the block if you can, and see whether there are any issues or problems with the management company or whether there's been any issues over maintenance or repair of the building. Another fact to consider is the possibility of significant additional expenditure to the building. Now say for example the property's got a flat roof, which is very common in flats, and that needs to be replaced every 15 to 20 years. Now if you're just buying that property and the flat roof needs replacing, then you may be landed with a big bill in addition to the maintenance charge for your share of the cost of replacing that roof if there hasn't been a sinking fund or savings to prepare for the day the roof needs replacing. So you need to check out with your solicitor to see whether there are any unplanned or unscheduled maintenance items that may exceed the service charge that you're currently paying. In smaller developments, there's such a thing as a shared freehold, where in fact there isn't anybody that owns the land it sits on. You own the land in conjunction with your other flat owners. That may be 2, 3, 4 flats, probably 5 or 6, but usually on smaller developments. This means that not only do you own the land, but you, together with your other flat owners, are responsible for the maintenance of that building. Now with smaller developments like this can sometimes be an issue, particularly if significant works are required to that building in the future, like replacement of a roof, particularly if one of the flat owners can't afford to pay their share. So look at this carefully and look at the mechanisms involved in getting such repairs done, and make sure you've got things legally tied up, particularly if you're a shared freeholder. As a surveyor, I've come across a lot of older flats, particularly built in the 60s and 70s, that have got large garage blocks. And these garage blocks have often got the original corrugated asbestos roofs on them. Now these are obviously a significant liability, as the asbestos is a potential hazard. So again, unless that cost has been allowed for within the service charge, it may be an exceptional cost you may have to face one day when those asbestos roofs require replacing. So it's always worth having a look round, see whether there are any garages and whether those garages have an asbestos roof on them. Parking is another potential issue, particularly in city centre and town developments. If there isn't a car park nearby and the flat doesn't come with car parking, this can sometimes put off potential buyers and renters as well. So make sure it's got parking close to hand, and is also close to local facilities and amenities, which again are important particularly in the rented market. Another key consideration when looking at flats is actually the length of the lease itself. As I've said before, they can be anything from 99 to 999 years. But if that lease is 85 years and below, then some lenders won't actually lend on it. So you need to check what the length of the lease you've got and what is the mechanism for extending the lease on the property. Is there a mechanism in place, and what are the likely costs? Because that could affect the offer you're going to make on that property if it's approaching that 85-year period. So that's my considerations on flats. I hope you found this useful, and if you have, please subscribe to the channel because there's lots more useful videos on here, but also download the free information below which goes through what we've discussed today.